Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to this extremely important and pertinent discussion in the current global context, a webinar on land-based jobs for youth themed on youth leadership, thriving through land-based actions organized by the UN Convention to combat desertification and drought. My name is Cacao. I am a UNCCD land hero and the founder president of Green Hope Foundation, and I'm delighted to co-moderate this webinar. Before we begin, I would like to inform our audience that simultaneous interpretation is available in all 6 UN languages. And if you have any questions for our panel, please feel free to post them in the Q&A box. Now, to say that currently our world is under duress is really an understatement, and it's being felt amongst all stakeholders and across all sectors, with a global population that's set to reach 8 billion. Our finite planetary resources have almost reached a point of exhaustion, and the irreverent patterns of overconsumption, pollution, wastage, and the consequent land degradation have only sought to deepen the crisis. And to add to this volatile mixture, the existential threat of climate change, and we have an extremely potent formula for doom. And then comes the pandemic, and for the past 20 months, it's really caused suffering unseen in our lifetimes, pushing back and negating much of the development achieved since the adoption of the SDGs. And while every single country and region has been impacted by the pandemic, we know its effects have been unequal. And as with all other disasters, it has amplified pre-existing inequalities, impacting more severely those who are already vulnerable, and amongst them, us, the youth fraternity. And as the recovery process pans out as well, we're witnessing another disquieting phenomena, because even that process is unequal. Rich and affluent communities are way ahead of the global south. And it's really important that we work to address and close this chasm before it's too late. And as someone working amongst these very same vulnerable communities, we see firsthand how ignored and neglected they are, without any form of structured support that we often take for granted. So unless we address these issues, we cannot rebuild better. We must use this as the bedrock for reframing our policies, ensuring that we focus on the creation of local circular bioeconomies that allow for the restoration and regeneration of our land for building more resilient communities. And as an example from my side, our teams in rural Bangladesh and Liberia are using clean energy innovation to run schools, to provide skills-based education for youth, empowering irrigation that enables them to give back to the land and practice climate-smart agriculture. So the way forward must be a new form of development. And this is the objective of our discussion today on how we should facilitate and indeed accelerate development of youth interests in green land-based jobs, to find inspiration by sharing knowledge with successful entrepreneurs working in the land sector, what policy proposals on land-based jobs should we consider, and what content is missing and is required to support the involvement of us as young people in youth organizations towards a meaningful youth participation in forums leading up to and including and post COP15. So today we have with us an amazing group of panelists. We have Luis Mabulo, who is the founder of the Cacao project from the Philippines, Adama Kante, founder of Food Sante of Mali, Fernando Morales de Reda, scientist and practitioner at the University of Granada, Spain, Gugulethu Tarakini, ecologist at the Forestry Commission of Zimbabwe, and Beatriz Paggi, founder of Clima del Elacio, Brazil. But before we hear from them, I shall pass the floor to my co-moderator, Juliet, for her remarks. Juliet, over to you.
Thank you very much, Keisha. I don't know if I can match your energy, but I'm equally excited and super ready to dig into this conversation that we are having this afternoon. As introduced, my name is Juliet Grace, and I am the interim facilitator for the Youth Caucus. The certification, so we work with the UNCCD Secretariat very closely to ensure that just the voices of the young people are included and they are heard. So for this particular conversation, we are going to be hearing from young people from different walks of life and from different communities as they share about their experiences as they tackle challenges of desertification, climate change, from their own perspective and what they've been able to do with that and what have they been able to witness, what have been the challenges, what have been the opportunities that they've come across, but at the same time, how can we work together to support them also to ensure that their ideas do not stop with them, but that actually their ideas get to trickle down onto other young people from different walks of life and from different areas of engagement. So as introduced, our panelists are here and super excited to dig into this conversation. So I would like to have Keisha introduce the first panelist who will, as we dig into this conversation. Keisha, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much. Before we do that, we have a poll for our audience, which I think, Juliet, you would be able to speak to better.
Okay, so as we go about this conversation this afternoon, even as our panel that has been prepared to talk to us this evening, we just have a couple of questions that we would love to hear what your ideas and thoughts are. So you are going to use the chat box and respond to these following questions. Which are some of the most important policy challenges young people are facing in their communities and what are they working on? As a young person, what are you most interested in working on? Let's say if it's energy, if it's technology, land ownership, financial resources, business management skills, specialized training. What's that one thing that really ticks for you as a young person when you sit back and reflect? I think if energy is truly addressed, then it gets to answer the questions that I have for myself. Maybe if it's technology transfer, that would be it for me. Land ownership. We often hear that young people do not have access to land. Young people cannot own land. How do we address that challenge? Financial resources, how do we bridge that gap? So for you, what's that one thing for you that you feel like this conversation should, or the people listening in, even our leaders should take note of, even as they're making decisions for us, they should be aware of. So the poll is up. So if you could take that poll, would really want to see where your minds are, where your heads at. Yeah. So the poll is up. I hope you're all able to see it. Please, we also have the Q&A section. It's open, so drop your questions there. We'll be able to pass them on to our panelists, and I am sure they will be able to answer them for us. And if they are not able to, we'll pass those questions on to the Secretariat at UNCCD, who are experts on the conversation, and then they will better help us answer those particular questions. So as your polls come in, yes, continue filling the poll. We'll be sharing the results in a bit. Yes, so, wow, this is quite interesting. So according to many of you, the biggest and the most important challenge that young people are facing is financial resources. How do we ensure that young people have access to the finances that eventually enable them to do their work? And that has taken 60%. And then land ownership. Yes, that's the reality that we are all facing, land ownership. How do we as young people have access to the land, and what does land ownership actually mean? Is it that I get to own a title, or me working on the land that automatically translates into me having ownership of this land. There was a tie there with specialized training. So again, what kind of trainings can we ensure that are passed on to young people to enable them, as we custodians of the land, get to work on the land? So those specialized skills, we actually need those very much so. And then the other one was on energy and technology. We live in a very fast and diverse world. Right now, we are from different parts of the world, but we are connected due to technology. So that's really very important for us to note. And then the other one was on business management skills. So these are the challenges that we are facing as young people, and definitely, I'm sure that our leaders that are joining us today and even the panelists will be able to answer to these questions as we go ahead with our conversation. Kesha, I want to pass this down to you to introduce our first panelist and we get into this conversation, because I'm very sure that our participants have been super excited and enthusiastic to hear from our panelists this afternoon. Kesha, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Juliet. And just to comment on the poll results, absolutely, just to echo what my fellow moderator said. And well, yes, financial support is something young people lack because people still don't think it's lucrative to invest in our work on the ground. But today's webinar is just one example of the amazing work that is being undertaken by youth all across the world. So our first panelist is Luis Mabulo, who is the founder of the Cacao project from the Philippines. If Luis could come on camera. Are we able to? Yes, there you go. Hello, Luis. So let's just start right away. Asking you, can you speak a bit about your project and how does your project deliver multiple benefits?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Kikashan. And of course, to give you a little bit of background on the Cacao project, it's an initiative that builds sustainable, resilient, and climate-conscious livelihoods for farmers here in the Philippines. Now, we work with the farmers and provide them with the tools and the training and resources they need to be better positioned for sustainable success and to understand agroecology and the importance of our soils and biodiversity. So what we're really trying to do is transform food systems so that it's inherently regenerative and ensure that farmers can work with nature to restore our ecosystems and our landscapes and enable them to be stewards to our creation. Now, through our initiative, we've been working with over 200 farmers and we've planted over 85,000 trees and really regenerated over 85 hectares of agricultural land in my hometown alone. And this ensures that livelihoods will benefit both people and planet and have a meaningful way to cement this interconnected relationship, integrating regeneration with livelihoods and restoration, and making that an expectation and standard to ensure that food security and accessibility of resources are available to grassroots farmers and to rural communities in the Philippines.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So your region is really vulnerable to climate change. And you were telling us right before the webinar started that you're literally in the middle of a typhoon right now. So how has super typhoons such as Haiyan affected agripreneurs such as yourself?
Absolutely. I think especially with typhoons and the climate crisis right now, we find that my country, the Philippines, is one of the most vulnerable countries to hazards brought about by climate change. While our country is contributing to less than 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and we have an economy that is primarily dependent on nature and agriculture. So we see that countless families and their livelihoods are endangered by this triple planetary crisis, including adverse weather conditions, and especially soil degradation, which is part of the UNCCD's mission. Now we find that this crisis has worsened and it has given us worsening intensities of typhoons, attributing to loss of land, instability of livelihoods, increasing crime, deforestation, and people selling their land. And it puts a strain on our ability to adapt to loss and damage, deepening impacts of existing issues and making our work an uphill battle to combat these issues. Now, as you mentioned, as I speak right now, we're experiencing Typhoon Odette, and we cannot assess the depths of the impact of its damage until after the typhoon is over. And these are things that we can't help, we can't avoid them, but we can work towards addressing and rebuilding and adapting by creating these system solutions that promote resilience and recovery and adaptation. But we also have to make sure that it's applicable within our local ecosystems and accessible to those who need it the most, especially vulnerable and rural communities that are impacted by them.
For sure, yeah, localization of solutions is absolutely critical. We can't adopt a one-size-fits-all policy anymore because our challenges are different. And of course, as you said, climate change, land degradation has different effects on most disproportionate effects on our vulnerable communities. So how are people preparing for this, and how can governments help out in this, moving this process to be more sustainable?
Absolutely, great question. I think there's a lot of ways, and we see a lot of stories of people recovering and creating these new solutions. Now, first off, it's vital that we enable rural and vulnerable communities to have the skills and the knowledge that they need to be able to manage these conditions and apply themselves to really understand the sheer magnitude of these crises, and how it's vital that they are part of the mission to protecting our landscapes. It's not just this big global issue, but it's something that we can actually address right here on the ground. And on the other hand, we also, especially for climate vulnerable regions that are facing soil degradation and whose modes of living are dependent on nature and environment. Now, we also visit traditional and indigenous knowledge that and these practices that are inherently regenerative, and that we can learn from them, and we can learn something from how they've been recovering. So we need to document these and recognize them as scientific knowledge, because once upon a time we had a planetary balance that was just right. And our elders had so much wisdom in this environmental stewardship. And us younger people hold a responsibility and play a role in carrying it into a new era of marrying science and technology with traditional localized knowledge and in building these interventions.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. That kind of solidarity is absolutely crucial now more than ever before. Thank you very much, Louise. We'll see you again in the Q&A session. And with that, I pass it on to Juliet, who will be introducing and speaking with our next panelist.
Thank you, Kakasha. Thank you, Louise. I love that Louise mentions localizing and applicability, and that's what exactly our next panelist is doing. Mr. Adama, 20-year-old is a Malian and the founder of Food Sante in Mali. So really his work is on how do we ensure that there is access to food, but then at the same time, production of agricultural produce is actually sustainable, smart, but at the same time ensures that the people that have access to this food get the right kinds of food for themselves. And I want to pick on from where Louise left. Adama, if you could put up your camera and then introduce yourself so that our audience can get to know you. Adama?
Bonjour à tous, je suis Adama Kanté du Mali.
Hello everybody, I'm Adama Kanta of Mali. I'm 22 years old. I'm owner of an agricultural enterprise. I have two businesses in the agricultural and food business here in Mali. I'm not sure if I should keep speaking or if you just want to ask me some question, Juliet.
Thank you very much, Adama. I think one of the things that we saw at the wake of COVID-19 was access to food. And I want to bring this back home for me here in Uganda. We get COVID, we go into lockdown, and people had no access to food. So from your perspective and from your experiences in Mali, how has COVID-19 impacted your efforts to provide for food security in Mali?
Là, je dirais que en tant qu'entrepreneur, j'ai déjà 7 années d'expérience.
As entrepreneur, I already have a few years of experience in the agri-food business because I studied entrepreneurship 14 years ago, and now I have 7 years of experience. Now I could be positioned in the agricultural value chains from distribution and production. I also work with lots of different stakeholders and small producers that are around me. They had difficulties to sell their productions. So on this panel, we have developed distribution systems that were already implemented. The COVID-19 has negatively impacted lots of agricultural and food businesses. We therefore thought of innovating a new system that can function, which is proximity markets. These local markets allow our consumers or the local society to find within 500 meters, they will find some mobile kiosk or booth where they can find all the first necessity food items that are issued from our production. They can also find our partner and small producers that are our partner and that have been associated themselves with these proximity markets. This has been extremely positive. The COVID-19 increased the prices of food items in the value chains. We had this social engagement to mitigate the production cost in our community so that the community and the other people can find food items at a lesser cost and closer to home.
Thank you very much, Adama. Like, you actually literally covered the gap of how do we create opportunities for the people that we are working with in the communities. But at the same time, yes, COVID-19 is here, the prices of food are going up. So how do we ensure that they are not losing out on their monies? Maybe my next question to you would be, you are in the Great Green Wall Zone, you're one of the participants in that work. What challenges does the initiative like yours face in efforts to be able to join restoration activities such as the Great Green Wall?
Excusez-moi, j'ai pas bien compris. Je pense que deux micros étaient activés en même temps.
Excuse me, I could not hear very well because I
Sorry, it
think two
seems
microphones
there
were
were maybe
activated at
two
once.
microphones open at the same time, so the question wasn't clearly heard. Could you repeat it, says the...
Okay. The question was, what challenges does an initiative like yours that's trying to solve the problem of food access to food and food security face in efforts while you're working towards restoration activities?
D'accord. Je pense que au niveau des défis, quand même l'accès des terres.
I think
Regarding
in
the
terms of
challenges, being able to access to the
probably the
land to
most
produce
difficult or
more
challenging one is to make sure we can access the land, to
is
make sure we can
the
produce
main
more and
issue.
as much as needed in terms of
The African
procurement, basically
continent
pretty
and
much everywhere, but in Africa
everywhere people
certainly for
faced
youth
with
it's important
the
to know that
financing
this is
also,
guaranteed, as well as the funding side of it,
because
basically,
when we
because
speak
when you come
about
to talk about agriculture, you
and
want to make
agri-food,
sure
we need to have
that
really
everything is
good
well structured
structures
and provided
for
for, be it
energy,
on the water side, the energy side,
industrialization
the
within the
industrial
sector
factors, basically to make sure that you
to
can meet up those
face these
challenges. So
challenges.
the
The
funding obviously
financial
remains a very sensitive
topic
issue.
is really a critical one.
Now, if you
Nowadays,
look today
we can see
at
that
what the African youth tries to perform and how dependent it is on the political support in this country, all of these factors are not extremely conducive in order to help and foster or support the youth to industrialize and really meet all the challenges which would actually rise to the standards of the local demand and local needs. So according to me, we would really need to be able to articulate the local policies of the different countries in order to provide some sufficient means to support the youth in this dynamic of collaboration and collaborative approach, basically. All of this would be more productive.
Thank you very much, Adama. And Kesha, you've been quiet for a while, so I want to bring you back so that you can introduce and invite our next speaker.
Great. Merci Juliette, merci Adama. Vous avez parlé de l'importance des solutions locales et de financement en particulier.
Thank you to both Juliette and Adama, who talked a lot about the local funding solutions to support the food procurement chain, basically. We definitely all need a more holistic approach. That is to say, in guise of a conclusion, basically, before turning to our next panelist. And
if you could come on camera, are we able to see you here? Yes, we are able to see you now. Great. So the first thing that I'd like to ask you from your perspective as a scientist and practitioner, what is the cost of inaction on addressing desertification?
Okay, thank you so much, Kasha. I'm really happy to be here with all of you. I think for the rest of the panelists. Well, I'm Fernando Morales, Global Ambassador for Youth for Nature, restorationist and practitioner with the Granada University. And that is a great question, Kasha, since the cost of inaction regarding to the certification is huge, especially for us, the youth generation. I'm talking from Granada, southern Spain. And we have here a very particular situation since the Sahara Desert is knocking to our doors. We have the risk for 80% of the Spanish territory is threatened by the certification. So that means we will have in the near future a loss of fertility. That means that we will have less food, less biodiversity, less resilience, and many other benefits that nature brings to us, to the society. So the cost of inaction are massive, especially for us, the youth. But the other side of the coin is there's an opportunity. We can create a new dimension, a new economy from restoring all these places that are threatened by the certification. We can, with this opportunity, we can create many different ways of approaching the land and making a living from it. So there's the opportunity of also the necessity for us, the youth, to create this new dimension of activities and shift from degradation and desertification towards land regeneration. And that's in our hands.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And as young people, we have so much of power to bring about that change. So like just from your personal and professional experiences, how are you able to restore land as a young person, bringing in these unique perspectives?
Thank you so much. Well, actually, from my perspective, when we talk about landscape restoration, it's not about just planting trees, as we all know. From my perspective, it's all about the people. We need to start with the people. So from Tercer Paisaje in southern Spain, we are gathering a lot of different efforts. So we are making like kind of coalition of civil society, private companies, academy, and also policy to bring all these actions together on the same place. So with that, we have pushed towards a Pactful restoration so that we create a common vision of all these different stakeholders towards the same direction. And that means that we will have at the same time and at the same place, the people trained, all the knowledge transfer, all the financial resources and the political willingness. And this is absolutely needed at a massive scale to reach the objectives and the goals we have to restore the landscape and the global degraded lands.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that. You mentioned how important the people aspect is. I think we're so often focused on just the numbers that we forget that there is a very important social dimension of sustainable development. What you said really echoed with me. My organization and I have planted over 400,000 trees globally, but all of them are indigenous fruit trees that the rural agricultural land-based communities are able to benefit from to help support their communities and their livelihoods. So it's not just about, doing one thing. We need to get that people aspect in there as well. That's so important. Thank you for bringing that up. Now, obviously, to support the ground level work and to ensure that we bring about change, we also need some kind of policy there. So do you think that we have enabling policies that can help to ensure this just transition?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for
Fernando, you're freezing. We are not able to hear you. You're still frozen.
All right. I think I got you again.
Yes, you are unfrozen.
So sorry, technologies are not always with you.
No worries.
Well, I think I got your question. So, well, I think that all the science, the knowledge, and the people messages are on the table. So what we need is to transfer it into action and into concrete activities. And I think we had a very concrete example of this at the COP26 in Glasgow, in which we gather in the same place a lot of very strong messages of urgency, a lot of science, very clear science, very clear targets and goals. And there's this necessity of translated into concrete actions. So from my perspective, there is a very big gap between what the decision makers are planning to do and the designing and developing, and then the people on the ground that needs to implement all these policies. So there's some space in between that needs someone, any organization that translates and transfer all these messages from one side to another, so that we can have all the knowledge and the local traditional knowledge and also the digital tools that we have, and transfer it into necessities for the decision makers to develop these policies that can fit perfectly the necessities and also the capacities on the ground that are already able to be deployed.
Absolutely. And the last question I'd ask you is, how do you finance the activities? How do we go about that?
And that's always the $1 million question. So I think that there are like different phases in which you can ask that question. From the very beginning, I think that as we talked before, you need to gather efforts to ally with many others, so that one can bring the trainings, other can bring the knowledge, and of course someone needs to bring all these finance efforts. And the private sector has demonstrated that has the capacity to do it. So once the projects have started and how to start to create benefits, it's important to spot the different business model that can come up from the restoration efforts. And I think we, the youth people, we have a real power to create, because we have a lot of creativity. And I'm not talking just about imagination, but also the capacity of creating new structures. So in that sense, we need to create this business model that can attract financing and move forward the restoration efforts, and so that we can restore the land at scale as it's needed. And I think it needs to be at the same time in parallel, the financial efforts, but also the knowledge and awareness that it's not just about making money. We need to realize that we need the biodiversity on the other hand, the local community and the support to the livelihoods at the center of the activities, because otherwise it's not gonna be a long-term design and a long-term implementation of the landscape restoration.
Great, thank you so much, Fernando. We shall see you in the Q&A session. And with that, I hand it over to Julia to introduce our next panelist.
Thank you very much, Kesha. I don't know if been able to witness the transition from our first panelist to the second one, now to the third one, like how their work actually fits well into each other's work. For our participants online, please utilize the Q&A sector so that we can be able to pick your questions, and then we'll be able to pass them over onto our panelists when we go into that segment in a while later. For now, I want to introduce our next panelist. Ms. Guguleth, I hope I pronounced that right. If I'm not, please forgive me, is an ecologist at the Forestry Commission in Zimbabwe. So we've heard from Louisa, who is project is in the Philippines, and her work is on how do we bring about multiple benefits. Then we got into Adama, whose work is actually bringing these multiple benefits onto the people on the ground. And now we've heard from Fernando, the scientist, whose work answers the question of science, answers the question of how do we bring the aspects of climate change to fit into the work that we are doing? How do we shift from desertification to land degeneration? And now we are going to hear from an ecologist whose work definitely answers the question of how do we shift from desertification to land regeneration? So my first question to you, Gugu, if I'm allowed to shorten your name, is how does research facilitate youth agripreneurship? So for you to answer that question, please first introduce yourself to our amazing participants, and then you transition into that question. Over to you, Gugu.
Thank you. My name is Gugu Tarakini, the founder of Research and Education for Sustainable Actions. This is an organization that works with farmers to enable them to do sustainable farming. So we do this by first conducting research so that we find the gaps, and also use scientifically proven methods to help farmers to improve their farming. So as an introduction, that's what I can say. Then coming to your question, how research facilitates. Research is quite important in identifying those important practices that are sustainable, more profitable, and also efficient. Because the challenge sometimes is that we may embark on practices that have not been proven and they've not been checked, but they're destructive to the environment, or they may not be efficient at the end of the day. So it also enables us to identify those gaps that are there also in agripreneurship. And those gaps, they enable us to come up also with unique businesses that are more competitive. You know, agriculture being competitive, if you come in with a unique product, you're also competitive. So you realize that research really plays a vital role in all those areas.
Thank you very much, Gugu. And then, yes, research plays a really important role in all the areas that we've mentioned in. But what are the research gaps farmers can turn into thriving business opportunities?
Okay. Thank you. When you look at really agriculture, it's the whole value chain, starting from farming, getting into the trade, into the processing, the packaging of the product, but up until to the consumers. You notice there's a lot of there's a lot that is in there, and there are lots of issues that have not been addressed that need addressing, especially in this climate change context. We need new seed varieties considering this changes in climate. We need maybe seed varieties that are more drought resistant. So we need research to come in there and identify even breeds, if it's Cacao, breeds that are more resistant to this change in climate. And we need new packaging types. So we need research to come up also with new packages for packaging our agricultural products. We also need research to look at even our indigenous plants. People have been so much into exotics. So we need research to look into how we can propagate these indigenous plants, because we notice that they are more resilient normally. And we need research to also look at how we can improve even their growth. We need research to look even further into their processing, value addition. We also need research even in the marketing. Things are changing. We need used to come in and research, look at who are the consumers, what they do they like, come up with softwares that will enable the marketing of agriculture products in a new dimension. We need things to change, but this can only be facilitated by good research. I think research is very important and is very vital if we're going to come up with innovative practices that are sustainable and quite efficient.
Thank you very much, Gugu. And just before I let you go, technology versus indigenous knowledge. Yes, we want to transition into the technology. You've mentioned about the applications as young people we are able to create and bring about. So how can the two work together in this space? How can we utilize the indigenous knowledge, but at the same time also embrace the technologies that we have in our era today to ensure that we are restoring our land? We are not actually bringing about desertification, but at the same time, we are creating opportunities for the young people to be able to benefit from land.
Okay, thank you. I think also the answer really as well is the research part. Before we put our technologies into place, we will need to do research. And I think also it highlights the importance of collaboration, so that we have, if it's a software and it's looking at, be it engineering, and we have an agroecologist, we have a farmer, we want to make sure that we will test it in all aspects, so that we make sure that it is friendly to the environment, it is also friendly for the business, and it's also good for profit. So we come to the indigenous people, we make sure we take their indigenous knowledge and we look at our softwares and see how we can fit in. We collaborate and see how we can improve this indigenous knowledge that we have gotten, so that it works at a global scale or at a local scale, but it improves our lives.
Thank you very much, Gugu. So we need to be able to use the technology to improve our lives, but at the same time, we shouldn't really neglect the indigenous knowledge that we have. We should be able to embrace it. And as Kesha alluded to earlier, make sure that we document it and we do not lose out on it. So I'm just checking if my other panelist is around. Kesha, do you know if Miss Beatrice is here with us?
Yes, she is here with us. First of all, thank you. Yeah, just like research is so crucial, and research helps to bridge the data gap that is still there. And as we all know, data gaps impact negatively the most young people, women, other vulnerable communities, indigenous communities. So it's so crucial that we really bring in that aspect, and of course bring together all of our unique knowledge that includes technology, traditional indigenous knowledge, and just so that we can create a better world together. So thank you for that. And we have our next panelist, Beatrice Paggi, who is the founder of Clima de Alessio, sorry about that, from Brazil. And so we just like to start, as we have with all of our panelists, can you tell us a bit about who you are, your organization, and why did you create your organization?
Thank you. It's a little bit challenging to say it because it's Portuguese, but my organization is called Clima de Eleição, which literally translates to election climate. My name is Beatriz Paggi. I'm from Brazil, based in São Paulo. I have a background in law. And creating Clima de Eleição was first an invitation by one of my dear friends. And we identified a gap in governance and leadership in the Brazilian policy. And this is related not only to climate, even though climate is this huge umbrella theme that covers so many different aspects of our life, but in general with how society was being dealt with. So in 2020, we had the municipal Brazilian elections for legislators. And here in Brazil, we have a federal system that municipalities also have a level of autonomy and of power that plays a very important role in our general policy. So they can also create legislation, and they have this huge role as well. So no one was talking about climate during the elections. And although most of the population recognized that we are living a climate crisis, our representatives that were elected did not have the technical capacity or any involvement with the agenda at all. So seeing that, me and my team, we decided to do something about that. And it was a very challenging endeavor because we were all young professionals and we did not have this institutional background to actually be able to engage and be taken seriously, but we overcame that. And we were able to raise the capacity of over 400 candidates during the election. So nowadays, the organization is way bigger than that. But what made us take this first step was seeing that Brazil went from one of the biggest diplomatic figures in the international level and really internalizing this narrative to one of the biggest threats. And that's related to land when you talk about one of our hugest gaps, which is deforestation in the Amazon forest. So that's what made us create this and start this whole movement.
Great, thank you for sharing that. And, you know, why, just very simply, why do you think that you've been able to achieve this level of success?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, and I want to do a shout out to João, who is my co-founder and is here watching me and supporting me today. I think we really need to find the right people. It's only with the right team and the right partners that you can really push this forward and essentially be able to concretize the ideas that you have. If you don't have people on the same synchrony as you, you're not going to be able to do this. So you cannot do this alone. Secondly is having a strong community. So we were able to build a support network of people that were supporting us throughout the whole implementation of our projects and the current projects that we have as well. So we can have a bottom-up approach and a pressure from all the different sides. So first, when we initiated this, we had only our immediate network that was sharing our content or even talking about what we were doing. But with time, we built this community and of thousands of people that were engaging with the politicians as well and sharing our initiative, and we're able to really bring more people together and showcase what we were trying to achieve. And being a key part of this whole thing, even if we have a small implementing team, if you have a strong community of people believing in it and actively participating in it, it makes it way more easy. And I think the third point would be making the most of the momentum. So we were only able to reach all these with the politicians because the election is a very particular moment that candidates and politicians are trying to raise their political capital as well. So you're only able to engage with them when they have this kind of opening. And also identifying this gap was very important. So occupying this unique space is something that we as entrepreneurs and as young professionals and as anyone trying to create any impact, really trying not to replicate or overlap with something that already exists, but identifying where and when you can make the most impact and what kind of skills you have that you can fulfill in this ecosystem. Because there are lots of people doing a lot of things and you don't want to do the same of what other people are doing. You want to boost what already exists and multiply what already exists with things that only you can offer and overcome this kind of mentality that's just an organization against the other competing for resources, for example, but creating these partnerships and complementarity that only you can do. So that's the keys for our success, at least.
For sure. Yeah, and I think that fits in really well with my last question, which is, what is the advice you'd give to other advocates in the land sector who want to organize themselves in this kind of way?
Mm-hmm. So first of all, I think we need to overcome the wrong idea that advocacy and lobby is something just for a certain particular sector or people. That's a very common mistake, and it's something that it's used by the current system to maintain the status quo. Because if people don't get involved with policy, then it's easier to swindle the policy to whatever direction you want. But we, as people that want to create any positive impact and leave a legacy and create the future that we really want to see happening, need to get involved with policy. So we need to understand the intersectionalities of what we are working with and other thematics that are already being discussed. And this is very relevant when you talk about the land sector, because it's related to so many other sectors, such as food security, as people already talked today, as disaster risk reduction, deforestation, and so many others. So you need to understand what kind of thing that politicians are already getting involved with, and use that as entry points to policy as well. So the last thing would be to really get engaged and involved with policy. It can seem very threatening or something that you're not used to doing, but policy sets the rules and the baseline for any work you want to do. So you can or engage with it and be part of this process and try to push for further support from the governmental structures that are already in place, or you can just ignore that it exists and have a lot of hard time afterwards when you're trying to implement your own ground activity. So we need to bridge this and see that on-ground work, grassroots, should be the ones also occupying spaces in decision-making places. So that's what I have to say to people that want to organize themselves in a similar way.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. We really do need to bridge that gap between the top-down and bottom-up processes. And of course, so often young people are seen as just blaming the government, but not actually doing anything themselves to influence that kind of policy. And I think what you've spoken about, actually getting involved with the process and bringing about that change ourselves, and we're not seeing that change happen, is a really good place. So thank you once again. And thank you to all of our panelists for sharing your views and perspectives with us today. And this has been so amazing. I have seen some questions in the chat and in the Q&A box. So we would request the audience to keep your questions coming. Please post them in the Q&A box so our panelists and us were able to view them. But before we go to our Q&A segment, I'll pass it on to Juliet to introduce our next segment.
Thank you very much, Keisha. I think for me, I am really excited about that next segment because we are young people and usually want to do things differently. We are not used to sitting down in one place and not dancing around or having fun even while we are discussing important things. So the next person that I'm going to introduce to you is a young person who was able to power his first concert with 100% renewable energy. How cool is that? He's a United Artist for the world's first sustainable album of 17 songs. One of each of these songs is on the Sustainable Development Goals. So A.Y. Young is the founder of the Revolutionary Battery Tour with over 800 solar-powered concerts that he has been able to perform. And you guys, his performance is one that you're all going to die for. And I hope that after this performance today, you follow his work, support the work he's doing, because what he was able to do with powering his performance with renewable energy was to show us that it's actually possible, that transitioning to normal energy to renewable is actually possible. So A.Y. Young, the floor is yours. Blow us away. We are ready for you as young people. We are ready to dance.
Hey, this is Save the Planet, the sustainability anthem of the world. Welcome, guys, to my song, Save the Planet. We gon' save the planet. Everybody looking at me like I'm from another planet. Woo! Save the planet. We gon' save the planet. Everybody looking at me like I'm from another planet. Woo! Save the planet. We gon' save the planet. Everybody looking at me like I'm from another planet. Save the planet. Let's do it, guys. For sustainability. They acting like we from another planet, Mars. They say climate change ain't a thing. What you talking about? What you know about that? What's your carbon offset? Facts, we just wanna act, we ain't sitting back. Solar power, wind and solar power. Everybody need the energy, let's store it up and power the world. Recycle, we need more recycle. But y'all acting like some followers on Instagram and Twitter, yeah. Tick tock, don't let the ball drop. The clock starts now, plug in, we gon' save the planet. Tick tock, don't let the ball drop. The clock starts now, plug in, we gon' save the planet. Tick tock, yeah. It's time to come together. Hey, to save the planet, guys. Join together. Hey, say the planet. We gon' say the planet. Everybody looking at me like I'm from another planet. Say the planet. We gon' say the planet. Everybody looking at me like I'm from another planet. Yeah. Say the planet. We gon' say the planet. Everybody looking at me like I'm from another planet. Say the planet. We gon' say the planet. Everybody looking at me like I'm from another planet. Yeah. Say the planet. Yeah. We gon' say the planet. Everybody looking at me like I'm from another planet. Yeah. Say the planet. We gon' say the planet. Yeah. Don't forget about the ocean, guys. The ocean is alive. Keep the plastic out. 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 Yeah, say the planet. We gon' say the planet. Everybody looking at me like I'm from another planet. Yeah. Hey, thank you.
Thank you very much, AY, for that reminder that we can't save the planet. Like if we work as a collective, we can't save the planet. And what an amazing reminder of the fact that the work we are doing is not in vain, but actually that the work that we are doing actually is very reflective and can actually transform the lives of the people that we are working with. I don't know if there's someone in the back. If you could mute yourself, that would be great. So at this juncture, we are going to jump into our Q&A session. Please don't forget to drop your questions in the Q&A chat. We've been seeing the questions coming through, so we've been able to pick them up. And now is that time where I bring back all my panelists to answer these questions that you all have come up with. And in no particular order, I'll ask this first question. Any of our panelists can actually take it on. So the first question to my panelists, I don't know who will take it. I think Louisa, since you've been quiet for a really long time, you will take this one. As you know, youth around the world lack capacity in terms of these aspects, land-based jobs. How can we solve these?
I think there's a lot of ways that young people can take action, whether it's working within your grassroots communities. Of course, you don't have to go out and change everything, but you can work within something you're familiar with, whether that is in your community, in your neighborhood, and you see issues that you can face when it comes to land-based problems and start doing something, whether planting trees as a side hobby or volunteering at local NGOs and learning the ropes really about what they're doing and how you can actually, take action and find different solutions. And, solutions don't have to take the form of entrepreneurship, for example, or a job. It can be this side hobby, or it can be integrating it within your existing work, whether you're in culinary, agriculture, energy, or whatever industry that you're in. It's making sure that you spread awareness and make sure that you're positively impacting landscapes and whatever it is that can actually have a tangent or connection to your existing industry. So that's one aspect, but I'd love to hear from the other panelists about different solutions that young people have done within your regions.
It's Fernando, Adama, Gugu. Yes, anyone wants to take a shot at this question as well?
Well, I can go with it. Well, in my opinion, I think there's the profound need of connecting. There's a lot of connecting for activating the flow of capacities. There are a lot of trainings and knowledge all around on the internet and also on the ground that varies from the very high technologies to the more traditional uses of the land. So it's just to start with it, connect with the people, and try to share all these capacities and knowledge. And I think that we, the youth, are very good at it. And it's just about starting.
Thank you very much, Fernando. Adama, if you're still with us.
I'm not sure if Adama is still with us. Hopefully he'll be back soon, but Google it or Beatrice, if any of you want to answer this.
Okay, I think I would just want to emphasize the issue of volunteering. I think it's one way that young people can learn. I think sometimes the major issue is getting mentorship. Sometimes we are afraid as youth to start something new, but if you get the mentorship from someone through volunteering, you get to learn a lot, and with time you get to identify also your niche, what you as an individual are passionate about, and you can start working hard at it, because normally these things may not be as easy as they may look, but when you are passionate, you are able to pull through the challenges. So yeah, I think volunteering, mentorship is also key.
Great. Beatrice?
Well, I think that lack of capacity is something that we can only overcome by doing, and it's very hard to find these entry points. And we only can develop this from the theory to the practice when we actually go on ground and have the courage to engage with that. I think what Google said about volunteering and mentorship sounds great. I only have some opposition to volunteering when we take that to extremes, and not everyone has the time to do this without having the resources, and especially when you're in a most vulnerable situation, and people that need it the most are the ones that do not have the time to do this. So I think we really need to open more systemically accessible vacancies for people to raise their capacities, and to change the approach that we have when it comes to interning and trainees and all this kind of program. I also think that specific acceleration or incubation projects and programs can be very helpful. I think that really gives people the exact skills they need to be innovative and creative by themselves. But yeah, of course, that's all coming from a lens of privilege as well. I think we always have to keep that in mind, that not everyone has the time to do this without, having the resources to support them.
Yeah, for sure. I think like what we're really hearing is that we really need this kind of multifaceted approach. Like, yes, going out there, volunteering, doing the work, but also understanding that when we're talking about land-based work, it can, not just restricting it to the volunteering field, but also recognizing land-based jobs and how important that aspect is as well. And of course, empowering and providing those who need it the most, including us as young people, and especially those in vulnerable communities, with the skill sets to bring about the change. So we need to come at it from all directions. And I think one of you talked about intersectionality and moving towards a more holistic approach. So that is really, really important. So I think that really leads well into our next question. This is from Angela. And she asks, how can we promote community ownership of all of these interventions? And by that, I think you're referring to all of the work that you guys have spoken about. So how do we promote and propagate community ownership of all of this? Who'd like to go first? Yeah, Fernando, go ahead.
There you go. Well, I think that it's absolutely necessary to engage the local community at all the stages of the project. So that means design with the people, implement with the people, and also maintain with the people. So that in the whole process, the people can get identified with the project, so that they can feel it as part of themselves, and also part of a broader community. And in all this trip, they will little by little get identified with this project. So I think in the process, it's very important to come up with elements in which that contains the identity of the local people. That means maybe local traditional uses of the land, some attachment and feeling attachment of the landscape, or maybe faces of the people that are already restoring the land and can invite the others together with the same movement. So I think it's just about bringing the people inside the whole process of the landscape restoration project.
For sure. Thank you. Would any of our other panelists? Luis, you've unmuted.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to build on what Fernando mentioned, because here in the Philippines, we have this culture called bayanihan. In the aftermath of, climate emergencies and disasters, people kind of bond together and work to help restore communities and rebuild and recover. And I think that's an important aspect where we need to start appealing to culture and understanding the local cultural context of the places that we have interventions for. As Fernando said, you have to build a community and kind of strengthen that community aspect. So it's important to work with that community so that they understand and are educated that what you're doing is not just kind of isolated to that, but it has global impacts, that it has this larger vision ahead, and painting that vision for them is extremely important, and really illustrating and showing how that benefits them and where you're headed, that you're not creating this ecosystem of whether it's dependency or that it's going to be like this, but there will be huge improvements in the future that everyone will benefit and everyone will prosper because of it. And we're also building more opportunities and really removing these stigmas. So in countries like mine, for example, green jobs and landscape restoration involves a lot of heavy stigmas that are negative, that people would say, don't go into that industry because it's not profitable or it's not somewhere you would succeed. But showing that you can actually be successful, you can actually prosper and create a lot of profit and have a lot of income by working with nature and restoring these landscapes. It's really important to kind of benchmark on that and show that to people and make it practical and easy in their language to learn.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Beatrice or Google, you've unmuted. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, yes, I also wanted to add that also communicating with the communities is also one important issue. We have to also find out the best methods of communication. I think I've noticed this mainly with science communication, that most of our information is still in the form of publications or some literature that cannot be understood by the communities. So the communities and and the information, there's such a huge gap. So if it's social media, we still have to learn how to tone down our information and get to their levels and make sure if it's Facebook, if it's WhatsApp, if it's workshops, we know what we have to find out first, research what is it that is best for communities, what kind of communication tools that we can use that are best for them, and how we have to also collaborate with other people in communication so that we tone our language and is understandable for our communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just to the point of social media as well, like what we often see is that, vulnerable communities are also on the far side of the digital divide. So, as you said, that we need to find ways to disseminate the knowledge that's there, because, we can't use the same tools for every single person. And, all of you have spoken about how important understanding the local challenges and local needs are. So we really need to move towards that. Okay, Juliet, would you like to give us the next question?
Yeah, so one of the things that's making me smile is how someone in the comment section said awareness using different mediums like music for the youth is a very creative idea. So we cannot stick to the old way of doing things, or let's sit in a room, teach, but capturing the interests of young people is one way, again, of having them deeply involved. And I think this is something that Fernando alluded to. Work with the familiar. What's that one thing that you relate with that you can actually use to be able to push on the message out there and to be able to do your work? So there's a question for Luisa. How can we promote community awareness of these innovations? And that actually feeds into the our panelists, how do we use these local solutions? How do we promote them for community ownership?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I talked about this, but really it's finding ways to formalize this knowledge and make sure that we recognize that as extremely important. For example, in our local towns, we've found ways to create our own pesticides, our own fertilizers. And we talk to farmers and make sure it's a mutual exchange. It's a collaboration. It's not us telling people, this is the solution. It's us listening. What are the solutions that you've had already? And how can we apply that? And how can we formalize that knowledge and experiment and test those theories and see how these indigenous knowledge apply? Now, sometimes we don't exactly have scientific explanations, but we've seen and we can illustrate how it works and how it's kind of becoming great, and we can spread awareness about it and show it and formalize this knowledge. It's really important to do that and make sure that people are empowered and understand just how valuable their inputs are. And we should also start learning how to promote storytelling in a very conscious way and being able to just encapsulate these stories that people have, these experiences, and be able to communicate that in a way that's either scientifically recognized or really just recognizing it internationally, because it's not so easy to be able to get those stories and be able to give that cultural context and that nature. And I saw in the question as well, how do we address contradictive issues? Because there's a lot of knowledge as well. We have a lot of misinformation that we experience. And it's, again, illustrating it, having that scientific method that Gugu had mentioned earlier, and being able to show this is what's effective and this is what's not effective, and applying that in a meaningful, practical way that people, especially within rural communities, can practically understand.
Thank you very much, Louisa. I don't know if, Keisha, you've seen any other questions in the chat that we need to make sure that our panelists answer.
Yeah, absolutely. There is one from UNISA who asks, what solutions do you have for states that are not doing enough to reforest, given that deforestation is rampant, especially in, well, beside their country due to mining? Would any of our panelists like to take that? Yes, Fernando, go ahead.
All right. Well, actually, my background was an old mining area, and that's the place we are restoring in. So that means that if you open a mining area, probably there will be a precedent deforestation. So that maybe it's the last part of the degradation process of the place. And I think I allude again with the local community. I think there's an urgency for as a global society, but also as a local communities to make organizational structure so that we are prepared to these risk and these threatened situations. Of course, there's an ongoing deforestation all over the world, actually not just in the tropics. It's maybe we can't stop this. There are a lot of global commitments to stop this, but also there's the urgency to restore all these degraded areas and make a forest as seen as possible as a natural forest. So for that, again, is the local community needs to be prepared. And once the local community is prepared, the movement is unstoppable.
Thank you, Fernando. Would any of the other panelists like to take that? Yes, Beatrice.
I think that it's a very, very complex and many times deliberate problem when not enough efforts are being done to stop deforestation. And I can talk on my country. There was never an effort enough to stop deforestation and to revert deforestation. And of course, community-led initiatives existed, and they are the most responsible for it. The forest is still being standing, at least in the Amazon forest, and indigenous communities and people will always be the ones that do the most biodiversity conservation and in general environmental conservation. I think that we really need to tackle where it hurts, so it's in the money. So as an international community, we have to take care of the production chains and to double check if the products that are being consumed do have correlation with the bad agribusiness that is responsible for deforestation in many different countries. So we need to double check them and to hold them accountable in high regards and all those international standards, and that really influences how national countries are dealing with that. And on the other side, we cannot only leave that to advocacy to the governments and to the companies. We have to do like this as a community to build this kind of culture and to pressure organizations to get into this kind of standards, and to the governments as well. So we have to vote better, to put better representatives there, and to have liability, because if we only put all these commitments in the paper, then paper accepts everything. We need to have sanctioning for that, and economic sanctioning. That's how I think we can start stopping this kind of movement against our environment and the climate when it comes to deforestation.
Thank you so much. There's no one else, then we move on to our next question. Julia, do you see any more questions?
So when we started this conversation earlier on our poll, one of the things there was access to land. And again, it comes back in the question, how do youth access land? How do we answer the question of land access? So how can we answer that question for our fellow young people out there? Any of the panelists wants to grab about this? How, from your perspectives, how can the question of land access by the young people be answered? Because it's a challenge that they are facing. So how do we go about it?
Well, from my perspective, I think that there are two kind of approaches to the land access. The first one, and the very needed one, is to an emotional attachment to the land. First, we need to feel connected with the place, identify the possibilities, the necessities of the land, and also who can you gather with the project you are leading to. On the other side is, again, organizational side. We probably, for the youth people, is important to organize in structures like NGOs or just collective, a group of people, so that collectively we can get access to especially public lands. There are many hectares of public lands all over the world that we are waiting for us, but please, before verify that these lands can be restored and they are not going to be degraded again. We need first to address the original damage of the land, and then organize ourselves, and then develop the project in a coalition of efforts and people.
Luisa, Beatrice, Google, you want to go about this question as well?
Okay, yeah, I think I must admit the land issue is a real challenge. And I think we also need policy changes in land. Maybe it's not necessarily also for the youth only, but sometimes it's generally for everyone. Sometimes the policies, for example, sometimes we lack policies that will encourage people to invest in land because they are sometimes not sure if they are going to be owning the land even, after 10, 20 years. So people sometimes abuse the land because you do not invest on something that you're not sure you're going to have for the future. So there's need for policies in that area, and also there's need for policies that will ensure that youth benefit also from the land, because you realize that in some sectors people will get land, but they somehow some kind of, obviously the youth can be taken like they are young, there's a certain age group, but if we're talking about jobs and they have to start doing things, that means they really need the land. So we need also policies to start to push and say, we need people, as long as a youth has this and that and qualifies this, they can get a piece of land. So I think, yeah, there's really need for serious policy changes in that area.
Yeah, adding on to what you've mentioned, I've noticed as well, in my country at least, it's not necessarily a problem of youth access to land in the Philippines. A lot of young people are either inheriting land or, have land that was given to them. The issue for us is actually having young people interested in developing that land or restoring it or using it for agriculture, because there's stigmas in countries like mine where people are taught that if you go into agriculture, it equates to failure or poverty. And so people feel discouraged at taking care of their land and would rather sell it towards unsustainable development and use that money to get a job in the city and stay in the city. And we lose a lot of interest in young people within these industries. In fact, the average age of farmers in the Philippines is 57 years old. And if young people don't do something, then we would have food insecurity in the next 15 years or even less. So it's really a matter as well of encouraging young people to see the value and importance of land development and being in these jobs and developing that industry and creating innovation within it.
Thank you very much. And then as we prepare to wrap this up, my question, yes, we've answered the question of land access for the young people and then the questions that our participants have posed before us. But also as moderators, we have questions. I think we allowed Kesha to actually ask our panelists questions. What would you say to world leaders if they were here today? I don't know who wants to go about this first. I don't know if you even thought about it. What would you say to the world leaders if you were in the same room with them today? What would be your ask or what would be your question to them?
So my message to the youth that are listening here is that you are not alone in this fight for your brighter future. There are a lot of youth organizations making a lot of efforts and amazing job. So it's about just to knock the door, say hello, show your availability and connect with them. Just if we are all together in this fight, we can get some results. So you're not alone. Please share, please connect, and we keep all together towards a better future. It's all about us.
Luisa, Google, anyone? Beatrice, what would you say to the world leaders today?
Okay, thank you. For me, I would love to push for the youth and for favorable policies for local or indigenous projects. Policies that will make indigenous products be more favored so that the youth, even if they work on the land, they get that return, because sometimes they say it's high competition, even if they start to produce them. So we need policies, strong policies that will favor production locally and indigenous products.
Luisa?
Yeah, sure, definitely. I think something I would say to world leaders is that we need to recognize the urgency there is to act now. This isn't some faraway concept. This is something that's happening. The crisis isn't like this future idea that's going to be done in 10, 30, 50 years. It's something that we experience as an everyday reality. And we're seeing its impacts in livelihoods. So it's important to not just address this as an emergency, but also to enable people who actually need the resources, the funding, the policies, to empower them to actually make the change and make the difference, especially if, of course, governments can only do so much. But there are infinite young people, as you can see on this panel, there are so many young people and projects that are in existence, and these solutions exist. It's a matter of giving them the space and the platform to speak up and do what they need to do.
All right. I think I'll wrap it up. As someone that just came back from COP26 on climate, I think the message that is crystal clear now is that we need to stop talking and start implementing the promises that were already made. Because if we keep putting up with that, we're not going to be able to achieve anything. And I think I echo what everyone else here said. It's urgent. We can do this in a cooperative way, and we need to elevate the most marginalized voices, because it's not a charity to put people in the center of the decision making. It's a right and it's an obligation that we have to do, to put our privilege of being in this power position to actually give power back to the people and change the way that we are doing decisions.
Thank you very much. Kesha, if you have a question for our amazing panel.
Well, given that we are running out of time, we have very little time left. The very last question, very quickly, just as, I guess, concluding remarks from all of you that I would ask is, and this is from Ramesh Kumar, how can we collaborate with other country researchers for project funding? So very quickly, if you want to answer that, and then we shall wrap up. Or really with any stakeholders to increase funding for all of our projects.
I think for young people, one thing we can do is, first of all, build credibility as young people in these organizations. We need that credibility to get funding, but also don't be afraid to take that risk and reach out, because that's really the very first step, is making sure that people understand your mission, understand how important it is, and then just reaching out to them and saying, this is what we're doing. If you want to fund a young person who is making change, restoring degrading land in this country, because there are a lot of people who want to help, but they don't know who is out there and how we can reach out and what solid steps there are to actually restore it. But the solutions exist. It's just a matter of communicating it and reaching out to these people in these countries, and more importantly, implementing local as much as you can.
Thank you. Fernando?
Thank you. Well, from my point of view, I think it's a matter of constructing and building a vision. So if you have a vision and you have patience and you persevere in, as I said before, knocking the doors of different people, don't despair, and it's a matter of time. The vision will come up with results. So be careful and construct a great vision that you want for the world.
Great. Thank you so much. Google Earth.
Okay, yes, I wanted to say make the most also of those connections that they make, be it in conferences, small conferences or seminars, and collaborate with people with like skills, and also start to make the applications. The way to learn to make these grant applications is to do it. And when they fail, try again. And when they fail, they should try again.
Thank you so much, Beatrice.
I think everyone covered pretty much everything, but yeah, networking is essential. And if you have to have the right match, you have to work on your convincing skills and to understand that some relationships take longer to develop. But if you keep talking to the people and really preparing the soil for something to really forest there, and then you can, in the future, have a more solid partnership, and then you deliver something smaller and then bigger and bigger, and at some point you have some recurring financing and support from one partner.
Great. Well, thank you, Beatrice, and thank you to all of our panelists. I think so often youth are, we're just stereotyped as strikers or protesters or those who just blame the government. But today we have proved that we need to really move away from that tokenization, this single narrative of young people, and recognize the ground level work that is happening. And young people are implementing solutions every day on the ground, in policy, really in every single sector, and land is no different. And all of you have spoken about the importance of localization, of understanding that we can't just go in with a solution. We need to work with the communities. And it's so imperative right now that we don't forget the people aspect when we speak about addressing our world's greatest challenges. And of course, adopting a more holistic approach that really brings everyone's unique talents to the table. So thank you so much for being with us today. And I shall pass it over to Juliet to give the closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Kesha. You've been an amazing co-moderator. And to our panelists, thank you very much for being here with us for an hour and a half, sparing of your time. And this is what I think it's Beatrice who Google, volunteer your time, and this is what we are talking about. So to close this off, all I want to say is, I think for me, the key things that have stood out for me is young people have the power to create. And as young people, we should be taken more seriously because we've proved ourselves that we actually can walk that talk. And we should always work with the familiar. And as we close this off, I want to say thank you again to our amazing participants for being a part of this conversation. Thank you for signing up. Please watch the UNCCD website for opportunities such as this. And right now we are preparing ourselves for COP15. So how do we ensure that UNCCD actually engages with the young people when COP15 happens? How do we want to see the young people engaged in that? What kind of conversations is UNCCD actually willing to have with the young people? Also, as the young people, what kind of questions do we have for UNCCD when it comes to answering the question of land, answering the questions of drought, of answering the question of desertification? So always look at the UNCCD, our social media handles to be connected, and as well, feel free to always drop an email to UNCCD if you have questions of youth engagement in this space, because again, as we've said, we have the power to create, and we can only create if we work as a collective, if we collaborate, and if the resources are brought closest unto us. And with those few remarks, I want to wish you all an amazing afternoon, evening, good night, and thank you again for tuning in and joining us for this wonderful conversation. To close us off is the land anthem.
Earth we walk upon, build our homes upon, she can provide our every